Welcome back to the show today. We're talking about role players in the NBA. What actually defines a role player? Is being called a role player actually a compliment, or is it kind of a sneak diss? Obviously, real NBA sickos appreciate the role player and the sacrifices they have to make for the betterment of their team. But I have to imagine NBA players aren't thrilled to be referred to as role players, or even great role players, because it means you're good at a particular skill set, but it kind of also means that you're only good at that particular skill set. Remember, every NBA player at some point in time in their life was the man. They were literally responsible for everything. There were no flaws in their game. They were their high school's or probably even their college's best player. Best defender, best passer, best shooter. So when an ESPN talking head says they're giving good backup minutes at the 4, even though it is a compliment, it definitely seems like an insult. It probably hurts their feelings. They're not gonna like being reduced down to an innings eater on a play-in team. Let's take an example of Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony, through the first 10 years of his career, was a top 10 player. He was the man on the Nuggets. He was the man on the Knicks. He never averaged less than 20 points a game a season. Then the Oklahoma City Thunder decided to trade for him in 2017. They wanted their own big three, with Westbrook playmaking, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony being the bucket getters. But there was a problem. Carmelo had become a bit of a good stats, bad team guy in New York. He was resting on his laurels a bit and relying on the fact that he was an all-star and he was getting his stats. The Thunder were convinced they were getting a deal. They just traded Enes Kanter and Doug McDermott to get Carmelo Anthony. What a deal. But when Carmelo got to OKC, it was pretty evident that if he wasn't the main guy with the ball, he was not the same player. Coach Billy Donovan tried to incorporate him as a stretch 4. They wanted him to be a catch and shoot guy, which was not Carmelo Anthony. He was an isolation player. So the Thunder were still good, but Melo was an eyesore in the starting lineup. A media member asked Carmelo how he'd feel about coming off the bench, and here's what he had to say.
How do you feel about starting at the 4, or the concept of starting at the 4, or even coming off the bench? And the second question is...
For me?
Oh. I guess that answers that part.
I mean, I don't know where that started, where that came from. Hey, P, they said I got to come off the bench.
So that year, the Thunder ended up getting eliminated by the Jazz in the first round of the playoffs. And they decided to give up on that big 3, and they sent Carmelo to Atlanta. And this was just the salary dump. They just wanted off his contract. Atlanta bought him out immediately. Then comes probably the saddest part of Carmelo Anthony's career, his time with the Rockets. At this point, Carmelo Anthony still saw himself as one of the best scorers in the league. So he signs a 1-year vet minimum deal with the Rockets, so he can play with Chris Paul and James Harden. And this is something I want to point out. A 1-year vet minimum contract is the lowest investment a team can make in a player. The league pays for most of the contract, and it has no effect on the salary cap whatsoever. That contract can be cut easily with no penalty. And that is exactly what happened to Carmelo Anthony. He only played 10 games with the Rockets before Daryl Morey informed him that he was in no longer need of his services. Carmelo Anthony was not a catch and shoot player, and ball movement was the Rockets' bread and butter. On top of this, Carmelo Anthony was never a defensive-minded player, and he was giving up a lot of points on the other end of the floor. This moment was a real reality check for Carmelo. He had to come to terms with the fact that if he wanted to stay in the NBA, he was going to have to be a role player. That was his only option. So he only played 10 games that year, but he did come back and he signed a contract with the Portland Trail Blazers, where he had developed his skill as a spot-up shooter, and he did thrive. He even started for them. He worked on a quick release with his 3-point shot, and having that in his bag also opened him up to the old way he used to score, dribbling and creating his own shot. So if you watch some Carmelo Anthony highlights from his time with the Trail Blazers, it looks like classic Carmelo Anthony. Now let's talk about a player who was a career role player. This player was never a star in the league, but he had a long, successful career because he got in where he fit in. I'm talking about Udonis Haslam. Udonis Haslam went undrafted in 2002. He was a 4-year college player out of Florida. He was an undersized forward, and he was probably carrying around 50 pounds of weight he shouldn't have been. So Udonis ended up playing in France for a year. He averaged 16 points a game and 9 rebounds. Their games are shorter, remember that. He also lost that 50 pounds I was talking about. This got him a contract with the Miami Heat the following year. And by his second year in the NBA, he was a starter. He started 80 games that year. But throughout his prime, there were seasons where he was only playing 15 minutes a game. But that didn't matter to Haslam. He knew when he got in the game, he was there to rebound. Haslam was a beast on the board. Most seasons, he averaged around 9 rebounds a game, and he's still the Heat's all-time leading rebounder. He was also a killer defender. He defended Dirk Nowitzki in the 2006 finals, and the Miami Heat beat the Dallas Mavericks. He was also there for the 2012 and 2013 finals, averaging 20 minutes a game in those playoffs. Bosh, Wade, and LeBron knew that they could count on Haslam to be an efficient scorer. They could also count on him to be an enforcer. Haslam never complained about his playing time. He was always happy with his role. Haslam's career stretched into his 40s. He played 20 seasons in the NBA. Although the last 7 seasons he was more of a player coach. Those last seasons he only played 65 games. And if he did get in, they were just for a few minutes at a time. But I think this is a testament to Udonis Haslam's mentality. He never had an ego or an idea of how things should be for him. He just took what was given to him and he served his purpose. Udonis Haslam is a 3-time NBA champion. And as of now, he's the oldest player to ever play in the finals at 42 years old. Udonis is still serving the Miami Heat as their president of basketball development. So let's talk about a few players now who I would define as role players. I want to talk about what it looks like to actually play those roles. And I think the main role player we talk about is the 3-point sharpshooter. Guys who wrap around screens, catch balls, and shoot. These guys rarely ever dribble the ball. A lot of times you'll hear people say, he's the type of guy that doesn't need the ball in his hands. It's usually a compliment. These are players like Klay Thompson, Duncan Robinson, and Buddy Hield. There's a lot more. The drawback of these players is they can't really create their own shot. They can't really get open themselves. They get open so they can get the ball, but someone's got to get it to them. The counterpart to this role is the bucket getter. These are the players who like to dribble and play one-on-one. They have a more versatile offensive skill set. They can drive to the hoop, they can dish the ball out, they can pull up for a jumper. A lot of times you'll see these solo scorers as 6 men. The team will use them to carry the offense with the second unit when the team's best offensive unit isn't out on the court. Examples of this type of player are Malik Monk, Jordan Clarkson, even Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram is obviously a starter, but he is the best example of a bucket getter. These players are also known for being bad defenders as well. Could be because all their focus and energy is put on scoring. Could also be because they don't like playing defense and don't want to do it. I think the stretch big is also a role, but guys like Jokic, Sabonis, and even Brook Lopez, I wouldn't consider stretch big. I wouldn't define them that way just because they have a broader skill set. I think more guys like Naz Reid or Isaiah Stewart. Guys that play that center role but can also shoot threes. But again, with stretch bigs, you do have to sacrifice some defensive ability. Playing Naz Reid against Joel Embiid has really never worked. Then we've got the lockdown defender archetype. This guy is the type of guy who's really good at basketball, but the main thing they do is shut down one particular player on the other team. Think guys like Davion Mitchell, Alex Caruso, maybe Marcus Smart. They're out there trying to make one guy's life really hard. If a team has a player like Steph Curry and that team's offense entirely revolves around them, a lot of teams will stick a lockdown defender on that particular player. The opposing team's offense will cease to function. Andre Iguodala is actually a really good example of this. He was so good at it that in 2015 he won Finals MVP over Steph Curry just for how well he guarded LeBron James. LeBron still averaged 35 points for the series, but the Warriors won and Iggy did a good job. Some version of this is the hustle guy. I think that's another role player, kind of like the lockdown defender, but they're definitely not mutually inclusive. I'd say a guy like TJ McConnell or Jose Alvarado are hustle guys, but I would not say that they're lockdown defenders. So those are the archetypes that I can think of. If you know of another role player I'm not thinking of, let me know. Tell me. I'll steal your idea and I'll make another video. Alright, thank you for being here. I think this was a suggestion, so if there's a video you'd like to see, leave another suggestion and then get a bunch of people to like that suggestion. I'll reply to a comment even if it's not a suggestion. Like the video if you can. Be good to your mom and eat a corn dog.